So good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon. This is the real-time enterprise breakout session. We're going to have 4 presentations of 20 minutes each about the subject, and I'd like to get started by giving the word to Dean Bubley of Disruptive Analysis. And there's one particular issue with this presentation. Since Dean is giving the presentation, we really need all of you to ask the questions.
Thanks, Rob. The other problem with this presentation was I wrote it when Alan told me I had 30 minutes and I only have 20, so I'm going to go through it quite quickly. I'll try and leave a minute or two for questions at the end. So, contextual communications and the real-time enterprise. First off, who am I apart from the annoying person asking questions? I'm an industry analyst and forecaster and futurist, and I cover pretty much everything across the telecoms industry and the broader technology space. And so I advise on WebRTC, on network evolution and telecom operator strategies. So before I kick off, one of the things that's worth giving is some context. And I contributed a chapter to this book called The Future of Business earlier this year on the future of the phone call. Which relates to the move towards contextual communications and purposeful communications. But the interesting thing for me was what else was in this book, and it was aimed at a business audience looking at future technologies that will impact the enterprise, government, and society. And it had a whole list of futures that are coming out, everything from futures of healthcare to cognition to artificial intelligence and machine learning, green and environmental technologies, looking at IoT, robots, drones, changes to our political systems, and so on. And the thing which really struck me, reading through this, and also speaking to some others since then, is that the opportunity and a lot of real innovation happens at the intersection point of 2 or more trends. And so if we take as a given what we're here today to talk about, which is communication services, API platforms, whether it's WebRTC or telecoms innovations and the much derided cloud communications terminology. If we take that as the horizontal I've put it here, I think where a lot of the real interesting stuff is going to occur, both for service providers and enterprises, is where that intersects with other trends. So it could be the intersection of fintech, financial technologies, environmental and green technologies, Internet of Things, particularly things around analytics and machine learning and AI. I'll mention IBM Watson, for example, later on, and obviously mobile devices, smartphones and wearables and so on. And I think that it's this intersection point theory that I would ask people to take away from this in terms of thinking of the real-time enterprise. And this sort of fits in as well in where I see communications going. In business at the moment, we're obviously mostly still doing person-to-person communications, phone calls, perhaps sending messages from application to people. But primarily we're talking about conference calls, contact centers, unified communications. Then on the top right, we've got machine-to-machine, which has been around for some time. And that's where you've obviously had sensors or other devices communicating back to a server, and that's growing hugely with the rise of Internet of Things. But what we're also seeing is a rise of person to machine or machine to person, and here machine could be something dumb like a sensor or a CCTV camera, but it equally could well be an IVR system or something slightly better in terms of machine intelligence going forward. And we're starting to see, obviously, a lot of ways in which we trigger messages or voice calls potentially, whether it's Siri or whether it's an SMS or whether it's a notification, going from an application to a person, and sometimes the other direction as well, of maybe it's sending a message into a 911 infrastructure. But what's actually happening is follow the red arrow, and we're getting more and more interesting interactions that are emerging. And so the top one is a machine triggering a person-to-person call. And I'll talk about this with IoT later on. But you can imagine having a temperature sensor in a machine. And if it goes above a certain threshold, it notifies a supervisor who then calls the local technician to go and check it out. That's a simple scenario, but it probably, if you manage to turn that into preventative maintenance as a service, it could add 2% to global GDP. The ability to fix things before they break rather than after has a huge impact on almost all areas of industry and society. And the other one is the sort of equation-seeming thing, M plus P to P. And that is where you have an object or a machine and a person working together communicating with someone else. And so it could be, for example, in the insurance industry, people have said for a while, maybe you could have the ability to send a photo of the damaged car to the insurance claims, but actually now think about the video, and actually using a phone to have the agent on the other end of a call saying, walk around the car to show me the damage. Because by doing it in video, it has inbuilt fraud detection. You can send a photoshopped photo of damage. You can't send a photoshopped video of you walking around the car. So I think that it's these new scenarios of how does communications fit into business process and enterprise that are really going to change the world. A couple of quick slides of future of sort of enterprise or business interactions, and this might be an architect to the future working on a construction project. You have multiple parties involved here. This is the architect firm, the developer, the landowner, health and safety from the local government. You have the people operating the cranes who might be contractors of varying sorts. You have the suppliers of the raw material, of the bricks or the plumbing. And they all need to communicate efficiently and effectively. And in future, you will find them doing more, which is whether it's a weekly conference call or maybe even using 3D printers to create certain objects on site. Could be plumbing components and obviously pulling up blueprints and file sharing in real time. So this is the sort of thing of where we need to think about not just how can we move from a PBX to a unified communication system to unified comms as a service, but how does all this fit into the future of the construction industry, where they've got a lot of other things going on? The same thing could be in healthcare, where you have people wanting to do, obviously, electronic patient records, but also maybe telemedicine. You want to maybe tailor the drugs that are being given to an individual to their particular genetics to make sure that they're most effective. You want to be able to track people's compliance with their pharmaceutical regime that their doctor has said. And what you may even find is that you can enhance people's well-being by connecting it up to a wearable to make sure that they're doing the exercises that their physiotherapist has said. There's one company that I've already encountered that has a solution for telemedicine, which doesn't just do a video call between the patient and the doctor, but allows you to plug in an ultrasound or other device to your PC via the USB socket and can stream the ultrasound data along with the video window at the same time. And this brings real time really into sort of not just the communications realm, but streaming data and potentially a hugely beneficial outcome. Other areas could be agriculture. There's a lot of interest in advanced agricultural technology at the moment, including use of things like drones, where you might have a pilot in a completely different place communicating with a farmer and maybe a drainage specialist or a crop specialist. There's a lot of use of sensors. There's a lot of use of what's called precision agriculture with irrigation. And these are just three examples of industries where communication is going to be a central part of the future of the way that they work. And if you're a service provider, understanding your role in all of these industries is very complicated, and they're very one by one. There's some commonalities, but there's no way getting around the fact that you need to have expertise in lots of separate areas or partners that do. And to me, this is the overriding trend in the telecoms industry. We're used to selling generic communication services and systems. A phone call today is pretty much the same as a phone call 120 years ago, except you can walk around while you're doing it. SMS hasn't changed very much in the last 20 years, as we already heard this morning. And so we're already looking at new ways of how we communicate, whether it's new sorts of messaging, adding video in, maybe having a slightly better user interface where you can swipe through a timeline on a tablet, and having APIs as well. But that's a how. That's only the first stage. The next thing is where do we communicate? And this is one definition of the word context, and I'll talk about that later on. And where do we communicate? It could be an industry-specific application of communications. It could be in a particular app or website. It could be the oil field maintenance module in SAP or a specialist software provider. And then there's going to be geographic differences as well. And the way in which the healthcare system works in Portugal is different to the US, to China, to the UK. And I think we will need to be aware as systems providers of those regional differences too. But what this really leads us to is why. And often I will ask service providers in consulting workshops a very simple question, which is, why do people make phone calls? And usually someone will say, oh, to talk to each other. And yeah, but why? If I ask the CEO of an airline, why do people buy seats on a plane? They'll say, oh, 17% is people going on vacation, 10% of people are going on sales visits, 12% is to conferences, 8% is friends and family, whatever it is. I'm pretty sure the CEO of British Airways will know the top 10 uses of a seat. But if I ask the CEO of AT&T or Docomo or anyone else the top 10 uses of a minute, is it selling stuff? Is it complaining about stuff? Is it speaking to a family member? Is it talking to a friend to arrange where to meet that evening? I have never seen a list of the top 10 uses of a minute, either in consumer or business usage. Get very, very rough guesses at best. But unless we know why people are making a phone call or sending a message or an email or anything else, we cannot optimize a product or service to make it better. And this is why I think that the opportunities are around purpose-specific and contextual-specific communications. This is an example. I've mentioned it to a few people, and this is in Germany in particular. You can now do video identification or validation of your identity for online banking or financial transactions. That's actually a Tesla slide. If you want to buy a Tesla online in Germany, you can arrange finance over the web. And one of the things that's important when you're doing finance or starting a bank account is what's called Know Your Customer. Financial regulations to stop money laundering or anything else. At the moment, it involves taking your passport or your identity card and going to the bank and saying, this is me. The German regulator, financial regulator, not telecom regulator, has said that video conferencing is an acceptable way to do the same thing. And so what you can now have is a video call center, and you can have a video call with the call center saying, see, this is me. And you can do that on the browser or in an app. And so you're in that context of the online banking app, you're signing up the first time, the online bank has no branches, so it needs to be done online. And it's not just startups that are doing this. Now the regulator has said that this is okay. The yellow color at the bottom, that is from Deutsche Post, the post office, the postal mail company in Germany, that charges between 4 and 8 euros a time to do this validation as a service. It's a real business. So this is the difference between something which is uncontextual and something which has context. We are used to just making a phone call, and that phone call is dumb. It has no indication of purpose. It might have caller ID. It doesn't say why the person's calling, how important it is, or any other variable. So I hear this term contextual communications a lot. It's something I've done quite a few workshops on and been writing about. And there's lots of different, everyone I speak to in the industry has a different definition of context. The blue and the green, the first two circles, are the most important. You're either communicating in a context, so it could be in an app or in a website, inside the airline app, inside the taxi app, or it's using contextual data. And the contextual data could be linked to your social network. How many followers does this person have on Twitter, or are we friends on Facebook? It could be, where have you been on the website? And we know that you've come in from the home page to product 1, product 2, FAQ, ordering page, back to the FAQ. Now, say, are you interested in some help? You don't do it too soon and you don't do it too late. You understand what's the context of that interaction, and maybe you think, actually, the cookies I have know that this is a valuable customer who's bought before as well. And it could be contextual data from Internet of Things. Maybe in 5 years' time it's the Fitbit, and if my blood pressure really is rising, I go to the front of the queue on the call center. That's a bit of a sci-fi example, but in the real world, it could be a salesperson who gets contextual information about their client, and they find out that this person firstly, here's the document you shared with them last week. And by the way, we've analysed your emails to them, and they like people who get to the point fast. Whereas this other person, ask them about their holiday. So, different sorts of embedded and contextual communications can be in-app, in browser, or in-thing. That's a thing called a double, and it's like a telepresence robot. And that sort of mash-up of devices and communications is quite an important one. And then we have application context, sensor context, and analytic context. The last example, I'm running out of time here, is emotional analysis. And that was a company that used video calls, and it can work out your facial expression. And so maybe you have something which is, you can work out how happy your customers are calling your contact center, or which agents make them happier. So, role of service provider. The traditional phone call in a lot of developed markets is going to diminish. It's not going to disappear straight away, but we are past the point of peak phone. But that doesn't mean we're past the point of peak communication. And there will be a lot of other forms of communication which help us do what the underlying, to resolve the underlying task or problem. Whether that's to be friends with someone, ask someone on a date, or in a business context, to sell something, to buy something, to complain about something, to clarify something. We'll find these communications are embedded into applications and workflow, and service providers can help there if they have specific domain vertical experience or channels. And I think the integration of this with mobile and cloud also plays very strongly into the communication services side. We heard from companies earlier on like Nexmo and Troppo about that. I think the integration with IoT is a massive world, and there will be some use cases that service providers fit and some that they don't. But I think that brokering of triggers, for example, we heard today, is a really important one. But the most important thing that service providers can do is move away from the minute as the quantum of communications to some way of valuing outcome. And that's not easy, because minutes are easy to count and outcomes aren't. Last point. Apple has three people with the term chief in their job title. CEO, CFO, and CDO, Chief Design Officer. Apple does not have a CTO. Everyone else on its executive board is an executive vice president. IBM has said that they've got 1,100 out of a target of 1,500 designers. They hire graduate design people. And this is the thing, it's about imagining stuff and then working out what the right engineering approach is to getting that turned into reality. I'm running out of time, so I'm going to leave it just with well, first off, WebRTC is an important enabler of all of this in my view. Ask me afterwards if you want details. And the key thing here is to understand context and purpose of communications. And once you understand what people are trying to achieve with, whether it's voice, messaging, video, we can start trying to add value to it, both as service providers and as vendors. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks, Dean. Any questions? We have 1 or 2 minutes for some questions.
I'll give you a comment.
Mm-hmm.
We used to work.
Please use the microphone.
Interesting you mentioned the SMS and maintenance, SMS alarms, which are almost as old as me, not quite. But when we were working in the wine business, had a customer who has sensors in the wine vats during the fermentation. Fermentation period is a very important period, and there are millions of dollars involved in the wine, so you can't let it be ruined. And this surveillance is systematic, so it's kind of interesting. It's not a maintenance thing. It's okay, now it's time to do this. So sort of,
yeah.
but not quite.
Yeah.
So it's fascinating.
I think that sort of thing, but you can imagine in future linking it up to, maybe the machine, and having a temperature sensor triggers not just a call to the supervisor, but a video camera to make sure the machine's not on fire, or something like that. I mean, there's certainly a lot of thinking about how do you go from a thing to a communication session. Now, in a lot of cases it won't. It'll be a purely automated process that goes into an IT system, but there's a subset of IoT interactions which need person to speak to another person. Cool. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dean.